I want to tell you something that happened to me 11 months ago. And I promise you, by the time I'm done, you're going to look at the people you love a little differently. If stories like this move you, hit that like button before we start, and subscribe, because I share these real, raw moments every week, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Now let me take you back to the night my whole marriage cracked open in a parking garage, over 4 words I was never supposed to hear. My name is Daniel. I'm 37 years old, and for the last 6 years I've been married to a woman named Elena, the kind of woman people describe as the glue, the one who remembers birthdays, who shows up with soup when you're sick, who somehow makes a rented 2-bedroom apartment feel like the safest place on earth. We'd built a quiet, ordinary, good life together. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you'd put in a movie. Just 2 people who chose each other every single day. Or at least, that's what I believed. 10 days before the night I'm about to describe, Elena flew to Chicago for a work conference. It was the longest we'd been apart since we got married. We texted constantly the first few days. Silly photos. Complaints about hotel pillows. The usual. Then, somewhere around day 6, her replies got shorter. Slower. I told myself it was exhaustion. Conferences do that to people. I didn't think much of it, because I trusted her completely. And honestly, trust like that doesn't just evaporate overnight. Or so I thought. The night she flew home, I left work early, so I could pick her up myself, instead of having her take a rideshare. I stopped at the little flower stand near our apartment, and bought a small bouquet of white tulips, her favorite, because after 10 days apart, I wanted her to walk out of that terminal and see that I wasn't thinking about her the whole time. I got to the airport almost 40 minutes early. I stood by the arrivals gate, refreshing the flight tracker on my phone, like a nervous teenager. And when her flight finally showed landed, something in my chest actually loosened, like I'd been holding my breath for over a week without realizing it. When she came through the doors, rolling her gray suitcase behind her, hair pulled into a messy bun, cardigan wrinkled from the flight, she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with jet lag. But the second her eyes found mine, she smiled. That real smile, the one that reaches her eyes. And for a moment every worry I didn't know I was carrying just melted. I hugged her tight, breathed in the familiar smell of her shampoo mixed with airplane air, and told her I missed her more than I knew how to say. She laughed and said she missed me too. It felt normal. It felt like us. We walked toward the parking garage together, me pulling her suitcase, her walking a step behind, scrolling through her phone the way people do after 10 days of being unreachable. Somewhere between the elevator and our car, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and I saw her shoulders tense, just slightly, before she answered. "Hey, give me 1 second," she said to me, holding up a finger, stepping a few feet away toward a concrete pillar. I didn't think anything of it. I kept walking toward the car, popped the trunk, started loading her suitcase. But her voice carried in that empty concrete garage, bouncing off the pillars in a way voices do in places like that, and I couldn't help but hear her. It was Priya, her best friend since college, the kind of friend who knows things about you that even your spouse doesn't. And what I heard next stopped me completely. "I don't know how I'm going to tell him," Elena said, her voice low, urgent, cracking slightly. "He still doesn't know. I've been pretending everything's fine for 10 days, Priya, and I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." I stood frozen behind the open trunk of our car, a suitcase handle still in my hand, my heart suddenly loud in my own ears. He still doesn't know. Pretending everything's fine. Those words landed like stones in my stomach. My mind did what minds do in moments like that. It filled in the worst possible blanks in half a second. An affair. Regret about our marriage. Maybe she'd met someone in Chicago. Maybe this whole trip had been about something else entirely. And I was the fool standing in a parking garage with tulips in the back seat, having no idea my life was quietly falling apart. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just closed the trunk quietly and got into the driver's seat, staring straight ahead at the concrete wall in front of us, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. When Elena got in the passenger seat a minute later, she seemed to notice something had shifted, but she chalked it up to tiredness, I think, or maybe she was too preoccupied with whatever she'd just been talking about, to notice how still I'd gone. We drove home mostly in silence. She reached over once and squeezed my hand, and I let her, because I didn't know what else to do, and because some small, desperate part of me was still hoping I'd misheard, that there was an explanation that didn't end with us. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life, and I want to be honest with you about that, because I think a lot of us go through seasons like this, and feel completely alone in them. I went quiet. I stopped initiating conversations. I made excuses to stay late at work, not because there was extra work to do, but because I couldn't sit across the dinner table from her without replaying those 4 words on a loop in my head. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She started asking if everything was okay, if she'd done something wrong, if I was upset about something from the trip. Every time, I told her I was just tired. It was the first real lie I think I'd ever told her, and it tasted terrible every single time. Nights were the worst. She'd fall asleep first, curled toward the window the way she always does, and I'd lie there in the dark, constructing an entire imagined future. Lawyers, moving boxes, explaining to our families why after 6 years we were suddenly done. I built an entire grief in my head for a marriage that, as far as I actually knew, hadn't ended at all. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's one of the most human things we do. We suffer entire tragedies in our minds before we ever ask a single honest question out loud. On the 5th night after the airport, I couldn't take it anymore. Elena had just come out of the shower, hair damp, wrapped in her robe, and she caught me staring at her with an expression I clearly hadn't managed to hide. She sat down across from me on the edge of the bed and said quietly, "Daniel, please, just tell me what's going on. You've been somewhere else for almost a week." And so I told her. I told her about the parking garage, about the phone call, about the words I'd heard and hadn't been able to shake since. I watched her face as I spoke. Confusion first, then something that looked almost like relief, and then, unexpectedly, tears. "Oh my God," she said, covering her mouth with her hand. "Daniel, that's not what you think it is. That's not what that was about at all." She told me everything then, all at once, like a dam breaking. 3 weeks before her trip, at a routine checkup, her doctor had found something during an exam, a small lump that needed further testing. The doctor hadn't been alarmed, had told her it was very likely benign, but wanted to schedule a biopsy just to be certain. Elena had gotten the call confirming the biopsy date while she was in Chicago, alone in a hotel room, terrified, and she had made the decision, the wrong decision, she told me through tears, but the decision she made in fear, not to tell me until she knew for sure whether it was something serious. She hadn't wanted to hand me 10 days of helpless worry from 600 miles away, unable to do anything but sit with it. So she'd carried it alone, called the one person she always calls when she's scared. And in that parking garage, she'd finally been working up the courage to tell Priya she couldn't Cord, that she needed to tell me the truth the moment we got home. He still doesn't know. Hadn't been about another man, or leaving me, or anything I had spent 5 sleepless nights imagining. It had been about a biopsy appointment 3 days away, and about how afraid she was, and about how much she hated keeping something from me. I don't think I've ever felt shame and relief crash into each other so violently in my chest. I had spent 5 days quietly grieving a marriage that wasn't ending, while my wife had spent 5 days quietly terrified about her own health, feeling like she couldn't tell the one person she needed most. We had both been suffering in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, and neither of us had said a single true word to the other. I held her that night the way I should have held her the moment she stepped off that plane. We talked until almost 3 in the morning, about the biopsy, about fear, about why we'd both defaulted to silence instead of honesty when things got hard. I told her I was sorry for assuming the worst, instead of simply asking her what was wrong. She told me she was sorry for trying to protect me by shutting me out. and that she understood now that protecting someone you love doesn't mean carrying everything alone. 3 days later, I sat with her in the waiting room before her biopsy. Holding her hand so tightly, my knuckles went white. And this time there was nothing hidden between us. Just two scared people, together, which is a very different thing than being scared alone. The results came back a week later. Benign, nothing dangerous. Just a small, ordinary thing her body had done that would need routine monitoring going forward. Nothing more. We celebrated that night with the kind of relief that makes you laugh and cry in the same breath. But honestly, the real turning point of this whole story didn't happen in that doctor's wedding. When we got the good news, it happened 5 nights earlier, sitting on the edge of our bed, when we finally chose to stop, protecting each other with silence, and started protecting each other with honesty instead. It's been 11 months since that night in the parking garage. Elena is completely fine, healthy, thriving, back to being the glue that holds our little world together. But we're different now. In a way I don't think either of us expected. We check in with each other more. We ask the hard questions instead of assuming answers. When one of us starts pulling away, the other one notices. And instead of retreating into worst-case scenarios, we sit down and actually talk. That one overheard phone call taught us more about our marriage than the previous 6 years, combined. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from all this, it's that the silence we choose to protect, the people we love from, is so often the very thing that hurts them the most. Elena thought she was sparing me pain by carrying her fear alone. I thought I was sparing our marriage by not confronting what I'd overheard. We were both wrong, and it cost us 5 days of unnecessary suffering that honesty could have solved in 5 minutes. So if you're sitting on something right now, a fear, a worry, a truth yours been too afraid to say out loud to someone you love, let this be the nudge you needed. Say it. Ask the question. Don't let silence write the story for you, because silence almost always writes the worst possible version. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If it meant something to you, make sure you're subscribed, because I've got more stories like this coming, and I'd genuinely love to have you here for them. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the people you love enough to tell them the truth.